Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Partu. Joining me today is...
A geek for fun.
And Steve.
Who's like way behind on the intro there. Well...
Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. I may have a delay.
Yeah, wow, oh no. Well, boys and girls, world round, it is time for that special time of year that warms the cockles of our heart. Maybe lower than the cockles, maybe the subcockle region. And that is the Geeky Gentleman History Month, the month in which we discuss the contributions that geeky gentlemen have made to history, but that have been ignored by a biased educational system, except not at all. I had to make a point to remember that intro earlier today. Because I fucked up, I think, every week for Ghouly Gentlemen. I think I fucked up. But yeah, History Month, it's always my favorite month of Geeky Gentlemen, where we just get to talk about the fact that it's always been fucked. And we're starting off History Month with a review of a Doctor Who episode, a historical Doctor Who episode, chosen by Steve. Steve, what episode are we talking about today?
Today, we are talking about Reboot Who, Series 5, Episode 10, Vincent and the Doctor. Mm-hmm. Arguably one of the most famous and one of the best episodes of Doctor Who of all time.
It's really up there. It's funny, and this is probably like the fourth or fifth time I've watched this. And I began to like notice things that I hadn't before. Because every time I've watched this beforehand, I think it's been like working within the context of the show or the season and like the overarching plot. It was kind of fascinating to watch this, and like there's still elements connected to the series plot, but this is like very much, and I think quite intentionally so, a standalone episode. Where nothing going on before or after the plot is vital to know about in order to understand the context of this episode. And I thought that was impressive.
Well, this is one where, and Alfie probably knows more about this than I do, since he knows more about Doctor Who, but this was not like a Stephen Moffat part of the plan Doctor Who episode. This was, there's a guest writer that Moffat wanted to write for Doctor Who came up with this idea, and they just sandwiched it in where they had an opening, basically.
It works. It really does.
Yeah. 100%.
And I kind of wish we got, I mean, it's so hard to say this when Doctor Who has like 12 episode seasons that come out, 3 years apart sometimes. I kind of wish we got a little bit more of that, where you just get these like nice standalone things that don't really have to bow and curtail to the wider narratives. And it might be me exaggerating it, but it doesn't feel like we get as many of these as we otherwise might.
Series 5 has a lot of them, though. I feel like Series 5 is my favorite series of Doctor Who by like a mile. But Series 5 has a lot of those. Like, basically every episode, except for the two-parters or a standalone episode, where only like one scene ends up mattering to the big kind Pandorica opens Big Bang finale. Like, this is technically not a filler episode in that manga way of talking about filler, because Vincent comes back or has like a cameo in a later episode, like literally the next episode, I think. And it leads right off of Amy forgetting Rory in the previous episode, and there is a little bit of paralleling happening between what Amy goes through here and what ends up happening in the next episode when we get to the Lodger. So like, there's a lot of like Series 5 narrative stuff throughout, but almost every episode towards the first half of Series 5 at least is like this. Like, the Vampires of Venice is like this. The Hungry Earth is like this. Almost none of them like really have anything to do with the larger story outside of a couple scenes.
It might just be like that feeling of the fact that they work so hard to get those scenes into each episode makes it feel like the episodes are more dependent on the arc than they actually are if you look at them in isolation. Again, I've mostly watched these seasons as seasons. I haven't gone back to a lot of the Matt Smith stuff to watch in isolation, so that might just be on me. I don't know. Well, Alfie's been fucking quiet, and he's like pretty big Moffat era Doctor Who stan, so I'm kind of curious on his general thoughts on this one.
What I think is really interesting about this one, aside from just the general like quality of the episode, because I feel like if I was to come on the Geeky Gentleman and talk about how good Vincent and the Doctor is, it's like, what's the fucking point of doing that in 2022, right? It's like, we get it, it's real good. So I guess the perspective I can kind of bring is maybe some more interesting, just what this meant for Doctor Who as a show. And this kind of informs Doctor Who going forward, and like Moffat's view on it, and like, other things. So the writer who wrote this is not necessarily famous by like international standards, but definitely famous in terms of British television. This is the person, Richard Curtis, who wrote Four Weddings and a Funeral. He's the creator of Black Adder, Mr. Bean, and Vicar of Dibley. And these are all like real big like British TV show institutions.
Whoa. I can't believe you gave us that intro, acting like we are not familiar with the genius comedy stylings of Mr. Bean, international sensation.
Oh no, of course, but like I'm sure you don't name the guy who made it. That's like right? Like that.
I'm like surprised that Mr. Bean needed to be made. I'm pretty sure it was just Rowan Atkinson fucking around on set.
pretty much, right? They just filmed it. It's everyday life. So this was the thing that Moffat kind of was the guy that started doing this compared to Davies' style as like a showrunner. Is Moffat would try to bring in actual kind of quote unquote celebrity writers to write Doctor Who, like people who hadn't worked on the show before but who had made a name for themselves in like British writings. He'd try and steal them for Doctor Who, and the most famous example of that obviously being Neil Gaiman, but he joined up with a lot of other people. It's really sad that the one person he seemed to avoid was Grant Morrison. I guess he just didn't like a fellow Scotsman. So there's that whole thing. So this definitely feels, though, if you had to describe Doctor Who to like a casual audience go, or like get a writer to write the episode of Doctor Who in the same way where if you get like a big writer to do a Batman story, and Ian's talked about this a lot, they want to do a Joker story because that's the one you want to do, right? I feel like the historical figure, Doctor, sad, melancholy thing is what a lot of like people would want to write if they could write just one Doctor Who episode with the premise. And so this ends up not very much feeling structurally like a traditional Doctor Who episode. We've got the monster in it, but the monster's very much an afterthought here and not really even a threat, which is not uncommon for Doctor Who, but it's definitely outside of the norm to even be treated in the way where it's literally invisible.
Which they maybe should have left it invisible, because that's probably one of the weaker parts of the episode.
Right. So look, there's a lot with that here in terms of just the show trying to find something outside of the Davies style of everything him being under his umbrella, and seeing if he can get new writers on it and new takes to where you end the spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen Vincent and the Doctor in a very like melancholy scene with a pop song playing in the background, which very rare for Doctor Who to ever use stuff like that. Like the other example would be like with the Master using like the Britney Spears songs, but even then that's like a very popular song. The song they use here is just kind of just a regular song. Like it's not like a famous chart topper where Davies would like often do like major current pop culture references to try and seem like Doctor Who's modern. So very long-winded like answer here, but I find this is very much a turning point in the show where, and maybe this will change now that Disney is apparently going to be making Doctor Who, but Vincent and the Doctor I think is the last popular Doctor Who episode in that people watched it that aren't Doctor Who fans, and then this is the cutoff point. I feel like this is where Doctor Who, because this is also where a sizable ratings drop happened after Tennant and never came back. And those people never came back.
I did not know that.
Which is a shame. Because this is so fucking good. This whole series is so fucking good. It's better than any Tennant series in my opinion.
Right, but like this, and so that's why you'll see the future Moffat seasons and even the Chibnall seasons, they're structured very differently from this. In terms of, like what you said, Steve, like season 5 feels like its own beast, and in many ways it was an experiment that kind of failed. Doctor Who moved its broadcasting rage from being in the spring, just to avoid the dip in ratings that normally happens after the first couple episodes. And they normally come back for the finale, at least in the Davies stuff. But this was the first time where there was a dip, and then they didn't come back for the finale, and they never came back at all. And Doctor Who never recovered that same pop culture thing, and then just over the years, down, got a little bigger for the 50th, but even then, it wasn't the same in terms of like an ongoing viewership. So, as good as this episode is, and as fun as it is to watch, and we can obviously get into the meat and grit of the episode, I think it's just fascinating, because this is truly like the Davies era and the Moffat era have their own like separate things, but this is very much like Doctor Who came back with Rose and got huge with Tennant, and then this is when it went kind of like not huge again.
So to give numbers to what you're saying about the ratings dip, the 11th hour, according to Wikipedia, had UK viewers at 10.09 million. And then by the time you get to Vincent and the Doctor, that number has gone down to 6.7. So almost half.
Damn.
And yeah, I'm scrolling through, and it hits like 7 every now and then, and nothing higher than that.
Which is funny because, like, it, you know, the show got really popular with David Tennant and everything, but it didn't quite leave the country. With David Tennant, it really did take until Matt Smith started being the Doctor till Doctor Who got big, or as big as it would get internationally. So that's, I don't know, it's just fascinating to me. And then
it's
Capaldi is where you
because,
started to see, I think, the international fan base fall off.
I'm just on this rabbit hole now, but like the Matt Smith seasons, all 3 of them, and the first 2 Tennant seasons are kind of on par with viewership for each other. It's series 4 that is apparently the outlier, where it's bigger than anything else. Which I don't really know why 4 would be the biggest. Not as a quality judgment, but like you would think that Tennant would have like a more consistent high. But he was apparently just on par with everyone else except for Series 4.
Catherine Tate is the big factor there, because she was also independently huge for Doctor Who.
That's fair. Okay, yeah. And yeah, she's a really, really good companion.
That's funny. Yeah, the big draw was the companion to that season of Doctor Who. Really?
That's pretty funny, honestly.
She was a celebrity. You know what is the equivalent of? You know that episode in the Titanic where they brought in fucking Kylie Minogue?
Such a good episode.
It's the British equivalent of like if the next season she came back as just the full companion.
No.
That's what the Catherine Tate Christmas special is.
No, I get that. Like, I understand it. It's just like so funny. I guess it reminds me of like 60s and 70s American television where like, oh, special guest star is on this week, and it would get like a ratings boost. And it's like, Yeah, watch fucking the Beverly Hillbillies meet Henry Kissinger or whatever.
That's really fun. The big reason I picked this episode to talk about is it in part because, yeah, Alfie, the Doctor Who of it all, because if we're going to be in History Month, then talking about the relationship Doctor Who has to history is really interesting in its own way. And the legacy of a lot of this stuff, especially as we're coming up on the 60th anniversary, is really interesting. But the other thing is, I feel like we always kind of bounce around how much it's okay to fictionalize real people and what the line is. Because Alfie and you and I were talking about the Superman Space Age book. And the choices they make with Lois in that book to just kind of replace actual reporters who were famous to interview famous real people and break the news in the fake DC universe comes off really poor. And then you've got stuff like Blonde and Elvis, which are biopics, but they're not really biopics. They're fictional stories about these people that are based on fictional stories that people get kind of muddy on about whether or not they should be allowed to do that. Like whether or not it was okay for Blonde to tell a fake story about Marilyn Monroe in the same way Elvis is a fake story about Elvis. And then you got Doctor Who just chilling with fucking Winston Churchill for an entire series and hanging out with Vincent van Gogh. And like, where is the line where one of those is okay and the other isn't? Like, why is it fun and goofy for Matt Smith to pal around with Winston Churchill? But is it a quality difference in why it's not okay for Marilyn Monroe to have a fictional story written about her?
I think a big part of that, within the context of historical fiction, is it's more okay when you have a completely fictitious character that is known for other things show up and meet actual people that existed and tell a fictional story. I agree with you to some extent that it's fine relatively to tell fictional stories about actual people and just use them as characters. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I think that's more of a case-by-case basis. I think the general public is more okay with it when you have, a fictional character show up and meet... Oh, sorry, Leah. Show up and meet a important historical figure or a pop sensation or whatever. Because it just recontextualizes it to this is fun and harmless, and it doesn't make you have to question, was that really true? Was this person really like this? I think that's what it's removing, because no matter how much preamble or how much information you give the audience beforehand that this is not true, this is just based around their life, it does kind of leave you in this weird place where you're like, I mean, if you're just going to do that, did it need to be about this actual person? Couldn't you have just, said inspired by this person? Like, it's kind of based around this person, but it's all fictional. I don't know. I think that's kind of the line this stuff seems to be walking, and why audiences find it okay in this context, but not necessarily in another.
I mean, I think, like you said, it's a case-by-case basis. I think the other thing about it is that weird feeling of, was this person like this or not, is sometimes an intentional and an interesting choice. And to kind of interrogate people that have whose lives have turned into a story that we repeat over and over again in that context is an interesting exercise. Like, the Elvis movie is a really good example of taking the image of what we thought Elvis was and throwing it into a narrative that tries to argue our image of Elvis is a lot smaller and a lot more misunderstood than what Elvis's story could have been. And it's trying to parse out some kind of difference between Elvis the person we know as an audience member, and this potential other person Elvis could have been if his life was different in certain ways. And then this episode, to kind of try it around, I think does a really smart thing of trying to tell a story about Vincent van Gogh, giving you information about Vincent van Gogh's life, not being an info dump about it in any way, shape, or form. Like, you're not going to walk away from this and have like 6 or 7 fun facts about Vincent van Gogh's life, aside from the fact that the dude was depressed. And taking that like portrayal of him and making that the memorable, and then getting to this really great ending where even if you gave him everything that he claimed he wanted, it wouldn't have changed the trajectory of his life. I find that really, really interesting because it is still entirely fake, and I'm sure there's someone out there who probably took offense to the idea that the doctor palled around with a guy and fictionalized his mental illness. But it's done in a way where it's not undermining that. It's done in a way where it's telling a story about what our idea of Vincent van Gogh was and how we can really never change it, but we can come to different relationships with him over time. He was underappreciated in his time. He's massively appreciated in our time, but that doesn't change who the man was in any sort of concrete way, because you can never do that.
Mm-hmm.
What I really, really like about the ending to this with the Doctor and that we have Amy and the Doctor really like grow like a great friendship with Vincent van Gogh, and you see that he's like the actor who plays him does a fantastic job, just beaming with joy of how much he enjoys their company. And you're really just like, man, I wish we had a whole fucking season with Vincent van Gogh.
He should have just been a companion.
He just has so much fun. But like he's clearly like very touched by these people, and they're clearly close friends in a very short amount of time. And he's like down to fuck Amy left, right, and center. So like he's having a great time.
Just like me, for real.
Yeah, same, honestly.
It's me and fucking Stevie and the Doctor, basically. But so like they go, and then it's still the same thing for Vincent van Gogh. And what I think they do really brilliantly here is it would be so easy to make that really bleak and really like edgy and really kind of like futile. But they do the beautiful Doctor Who thing, and like why the character of the Doctor is like so important. Of reframing that, like, yes, just some people's demons, there's just nothing you will be able to do, and sometimes they're going to lose those battles, but that doesn't mean the trying and the moments of joy you gave them in between that were worthless. They were worth everything because of how it ended, and it's what made those moments special. And like, that's such a very... Everyone always focuses in like stories that deal with suicide and grief, and sorry to get heavy for everyone listening to the Doctor Who podcast, but I think it's important because we often derail into just focusing on the sadness of the ending, and kind of the tragedy and the violence of death and life, and there had to be a way to fix people or a way to solve the problem. And a lot of the times there are ways to do, and a lot of that can be with comfort of friends or love or just people being able to figure out on their own, or a combination of all of them. But even when things don't go right and things do end in a more tragic way, that doesn't mean the entire life and joy of those person is suddenly gone. That doesn't mean that their moments of laughter with the friends were meaningless and it didn't mean anything to them. In fact, it probably meant everything to them. And so that's very, very rarely discussed in fiction, especially children's fiction. So I definitely want to give a massive commendment to this episode for doing that. And I think it's a really mature, really bittersweet, but heartfelt, like, honest way of discussing that and showing that to the audience.
It's kind of brilliant, too, like, just how good that story is in the context of what was happening in the season at this point. Like, the previous episode, Rory gets sucked into that crack in the universe, and the Doctor is, like, trying to plead with Amy to be like, you don't want to forget him, you can just stay focused on him, and then just hard cut, and she completely forgets he exists. And then you go to this episode where he's going around and having fun adventures with her, and she's clearly suspicious of him because, like, why are you being nice? And it's because she forgot Rory. She forgot the person in her life that meant the most to her. And then paralleling that with a story like Vincent van Gogh's and having that really beautiful theme of, like, just because you lose something does not mean that you lost the experiences of it. At the same time, Amy has literally lost all of the memories and the experiences of the person she loves the most. That is really, really good. And then using that as your jumping pad into the next few episodes to kind of bring the meaning of that back. And then the way Matt Smith's Doctor in the context of this season is a guy who looks very young and is playful and joyful in a fairy tale kind of way, but is leaning harder into that super old, done with it personality, where he's always teetering between I've done everything and this is all numbing at this point, versus I have to have a childlike wonder into everything I see because I have to at least feel like it's the first time I'm experiencing it. It's really good, and you can really tell that there is a kinship between that version of the Doctor and this image of Vincent van Gogh we meet in this episode. It's just such a well-written episode. Like, it is clearly kind of just like a drop in the middle of the season with a guest writer, but it feels like so natural to the whole rest of the series.
It absolutely does, and I think the thing I most want to discuss with this, because I had this reaction when I watched it the first time, and on my recent time going through all of New Who, I had the same thought again, and I'm like, I've tried my best to try to see it from every possible angle, and I just keep coming to the same conclusion. And that is that this, more than any other episode, did not need a monster. Or an alien, or what the fuck ever. For a long time, I've been a proponent of, I really would like some Doctor Who episodes set in the past where it's not a fucking alien invasion, or what the fuck ever. Because half the time, that's not the interesting part of those episodes anyway. It just feels like so like, what's the word I want here? Required or something almost. Like, okay, well, let's check this box and then we can get to the more interesting stuff. And it just kind of kills me. I really, really, really prefer the episodes that are just, or I prefer the idea, at least, of the episodes that are just like a historical standalone. And we don't really get any of that until the Jodie stuff, more or less. And in all fairness, those aren't very good. But I appreciate the effort more, and I think this is just a really good example of, like, this just feels like it kind of wasted... I guess not wasted the time, but it feels like at this odds and ends space, because it's such a weird thing where Vincent kills the monster and it dies, and it's kind of like this... It's treated like a sad moment, like, oh, this didn't have to happen. If only we could have found another way. And then, like, later when the Doctor's getting ready to leave, it's like, we fought monsters together. I'm like, that's at odds with the tone of how that scene ended. It feels like it's not... It almost feels like you can sense the notes of, here's... let me just add this monster to your script. And I'm not sure if that's what happened or not, but just that's the feeling that's generated by scenes like that.
I think this is... Because I agree with your point. I think this is the exception that proves the rule. Because I would 100% be down for more Doctor Who episodes where he goes back in time, meets historical figures, and we don't have to do Monster of the Week, because I think Monster of the Week's a very boring formula. It was cool and inventive in the 90s when everything was episodic, with like very bare bones serialized storytelling. But by this point, we've just kind of played that formula into the dirt, and it gets kind of boring. Especially when you have really good actors playing historical figures. Like, why not just cash in on that instead of trying to throw in a kooky villain for the sake of it? But I think, if I was going to make an argument for this episode, I think the reason... what the fuck are they called again? The
very important characters, huh?
Yeah, whatever the fuck they're called. I think this episode is trying to be smart about the kind of monster it's using, and the fact that it's pointless kind of plays into the theme of the episode at large. Because it is invisible, it's something that only Vincent can seem to deal with. He fights it mostly on its own. It gets killed by him on his own. And by the end of it, killing that monster, this idea that they could just go back in time and solve this thing that would potentially make Vincent van Gogh not crazy anymore, not mentally ill anymore, isn't actually what happens. And that it is largely kind of pointless in the grand scheme of his life in that sense. So I kind of like that touch. I like the idea that they're trying to be really smart with what the metaphor of the monster of the week is. And the fact that it's pointless kind of plays into the more depressing read of the episode, which is he can fight this invisible monster in his head all day, all much as he wants, but even when he thinks it's dead, it doesn't actually die. And his life still ends up exactly where it was going to end up regardless. Like, I think there's something to that. It would potentially have been better without a monster of the week, but I think this is the best you could have done a monster of the week with this kind of setup.
I would agree that, like, I think it's well executed. I just, the more I've just always had that gut reaction and seen it over and over again, I'm kind of sticking to my guns on it. I think that it just would have worked better. And I remember the reaction I got when I was like, I just didn't need the monster. It really didn't. The reaction, well, then what would happen in the episode? I'm like, no, you keep the idea that, like, there's evidence of a monster, but there isn't an actual monster, and I think it would make the plot a lot stronger. That's just, I don't know. It's just been my pet peeve with Doctor Who that I'd like to see more of, and it's kind of, I guess the fact that it's such a, like, stellar episode in so many ways just makes that aspect of it stand out just that little bit more. Alfie, you got to throw in on this one?
Yeah, I agree with you, Ian, in, like, the general sense. Like, I do think a lot of the times it is just for the sake of having one, and it often hurts the episode from the more interesting parts. But here I definitely do think you needed it.
Okay.
Because I feel like the whole... You just don't get those scenes of Vincent van Gogh being so fucking excited that there's a fucking space monster and all this shit is real. And I just don't think you can get that if there actually isn't something, like, supernatural for him to, like, get hype about. Now, if that takes the shape of an invisible giant chicken, maybe not. But I think if I was the editor on that, I would suggest, like, no, there needs to be something beyond the norm, beyond just, like, there needs to just be something exciting that the Doctor and his companions do that Vincent van Gogh gets to share in. And I don't think you should do that for every historical figure. I think specifically for him as an artist and, like, him talking about the beauty and him seeing those things, I don't think it works. I don't think this episode works without that. The form that takes, sure, you can change it. You can make it more subtle. You can change it, make it less ridiculous near the end in that very Doctor Who way. But I definitely think you need that big element of the extraordinary that is throughout the entire episode for Vincent van Gogh to get hype about. Otherwise, I don't think the episode works.
I will say, though, too, that I think Matt Smith's episodes about finding just a random person who's going through the shit and then taking them on a fun adventure that makes them reevaluate their life is a formula they got a lot better with over time. Because this episode is really good, but, like, you could see a Stephen Moffat who wrote literally just a few episodes down the line, the Christmas Carol episode, who could have done this without a supernatural threat. Where he could have just taken Amy to meet Vincent van Gogh, and they could have just had space adventures without having to fight a monster, and tell a very similar kind of story. And you can keep going down this ball because he's got that, I forget the name of that dude on Contemporary Earth that he just hangs out with, where he's got a baby that he talks to, whatever the fuck the dude's name is.
Stormageddon,
like Matt Smith episode. Whatever that dude's name is, but Matt Smith's episodes as they get to at playing a character that is world weary, that knows all the secrets to the universe, showing ordinary people the wonder in everyday life. And this episode is definitely an early version of that is really, really good. But it would be interesting to kind of go back with hindsight, seeing where this narrative evolves, and seeing if you could write that with that same storytelling quality without including the monster, because clearly they could later.
I don't know. I guess I'm the odd man out. I just think that the monster subplot is just not the interesting thing here. I don't think it adds... I'm not going to say it doesn't add to the story. I think it's well executed for what it is. I just feel like something like this was already making so many good decisions. It would have been nice to see them make some like bold decisions and choices as well. And a lot of this just feels like kind of safe. That's usually the reaction I have to the monsters and the historical things. Like, oh well, this is safe, so the people that are just here for the hard sci-fi, let's call it, can have something to latch onto. Here's one for the people, for the lore enthusiasts. Here's one so someone can make a wiki article about this monster. And that's just kind of the reaction I've always had to it. If I'm alone in that, I guess I'm alone in that. As always, I think the scene that just hits the best for me, especially being the Tenet fan that I am, is definitely when the doctor goes to, like, Vincent's taken a while to get ready, and the doctor goes to get him, and he's like just absolutely overwhelmed in the moment by just crippling depression. He's crying and sobbing, and just the conversation they have is so incredibly fascinating. Just like, not only from a very humanist perspective and talking about the just the moods that people go through in depressive states, but just like taking a step outside of that from like a Doctor Who fan perspective. It's like, everyone leaves and I will be alone, and I'm like, no, not David Tennant alone in the TARDIS. It's like, Matt Smith has those scenes too where they like really don't travel alone, Doctor, but like he did it so much. He kind of like held out. David Tennant being alone was always so fucking sad, and it hit on just that particular level. I was like, wow, damn, I guess I'd forgotten about that part. It worked in an interesting kind of meta sense to connect those two, because again, this wasn't too long after David Tennant's finale and stuff, so it's just kind of fascinating.
It would have been really interesting to see Vincent Van Gogh interact with David Tennant, because I think those two actors back and forth with each other would have just been god tier.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that BBC will always have, is just... or Doctor Who in general, really, where, like, it doesn't really matter how bad the, like, effects or even the plot is most of the time. You'll just get, like, the best fucking actor in the world to say the zaniest shit. And I'm kind of always appreciative of it, honestly.
So the last time I watched this episode, before the most recent one for this review, I was going through all of Reboot Who in order, and I watched this episode a couple weeks before I went to an actual Van Gogh exhibit. So in Raleigh, there is this exhibit that got put up earlier in the year, and it's been around the country in different places. And I don't know if you can go to it in a different state at the same time or not, but it's this immersive Van Gogh exhibit, which is basically this giant fucking warehouse, and you walk through it, and all of Van Gogh's art is either projected into rooms, so you're standing inside of it, or it's turned into like a 3D model. So the portrait of his bed, you actually like can walk into a room, and they've created a room that is in the style of that painting, so you can like physically see his bed in 3 dimensions. You can go into like a VR version of walking through all of Italy in the village he lived in, all painted in his style. And you can go to this really big room that's basically just like, what if you were inside Starry Night? Just all of Starry Night all across the walls, with boats passing and lights flickering, and it'll transition into like floral paintings and stuff he did, and landscapes and self-portraits and stuff. You walk in through like a hall of his portraits that kind of rotate out as his art style evolved. They turned certain works of art into like 3-dimensional sculptures, so you can look at it from all angles and you could see the individual pieces and stuff. It was one of the coolest things I had ever seen. And watching this episode and then going to the exhibit and reading all the little blurbs about his life, and then having that monologue from the end of the episode about him being like the greatest artist of all time, I'm like, shit, even now, we're just sitting here in awe of Vincent Van Gogh. It was really, really cool, and I got to buy a print of Night Cafe, which is in this episode and now hangs over my kitchen, and it just makes me very happy.
It's a good one. That final scene with Van Gogh in the gallery is just fucking heart wrenching.
It's so good.
It's a real tearjerker of a moment. No lie.
It's the scene after that always like I'll tear up a little bit, but the waterworks really start in the scene after that, where they drop him off and come back to the future. And Amy's like, I can't wait to see how many more paintings there are.
The long life of Vincent Van Gogh, and the Dutch, like, he's like trying to soften the blow and just doesn't happen. And I'm like,
I love that. I think that moment is for me the epitome of the episode. Great exploration of Vincent Van Gogh as a person, and going back and forth with him, and he delivers a really good performance, and you get an appreciation of his legacy as an artist. But then ending the episode with all of that does not solve people's problems in their day-to-day life, and you do kind of just wind up exactly where you were, and you have to keep going, and it's really, really sad. I love it.
He's a sad one. I think the secret to Steve's appreciation of anything ever would just be, can you make it sad though?
It is also a fun, and this is a fun British fact that I will bring up, even though I'm not Alfie. I love that the guy in the theater is played by Bill Nighy. That's so fucking cool.
Okay. Who's that?
Because he's a big deal.
In what context?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, he's a big deal. He's a big British movie star.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, like fucking Love Actually. Have you ever seen Love Actually?
No.
Did you ever see any of the Pirates movies with Davy Jones?
Oh, he's Davy Jones?
He's Davy Jones!
Oh, well, sorry, I didn't recognize him without tentacles on his face.
No, he's a really big character actor. He's around doing like bit parts in movies and then getting some villain roles here and there. He did like a shit ton of television. He's usually not like the star of anything that he's in usually, but he's a really big actor in the UK, and he's gone all over the place on radio and theater and stuff. And he got really popular in Love Actually because he plays the musician who's just like a complete jackass, but understands that the rest of the world is a jackass, and so he's just like coasting his way through life, where he's trying to like lean into being a failure, but he keeps failing upwards, and it makes him miserable. And there's actually another movie that would be fun to do on History Month. Is there's a TV movie called Hitler's SS, Portrait of Evil, where it's about two brothers in Nazi Germany, one who joins the SA and one who joins the SS. And he's in that. I think he plays the SS brother. But that's a really, really good fucking movie.
Interesting. Nah, I kind of recognize the actor, but I did like one of those ones, like, I feel like I've seen him in something kind of thing, and apparently I did. Apparently I saw him in 2 movies and a really good CGI character. I don't know. It was interesting.
He's cool.
The thing I think I liked a lot about those ending scenes at the gallery is the changing of the painting that like started the whole journey. I thought that was just like a cool little touch, little time travel shenanigan thing. It's just neat. I like that. I like stuff like that a lot.
I really like that too. I like that Vincent Van Gogh's art style is kind of all over the place in this series, because the painting of the TARDIS exploding is done in that same style. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty neat.
Also like the signature on the flowers. I thought that was super adorable.
Oh yeah, that's pretty cute. Yeah, I think they use all of his paintings pretty smartly in this. Like you
Uh-oh. I think we lost
turn off some in his...
Steve be cutting in and out.
Yeah.
Oh, my bad. Is this better?
Yeah, it's just like briefly. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I thought the episode was really smart about all the.
God damn
We
it.
got the big ones, but he's also working on some stuff in his room, and you get to see Night Cafe, which is a really nice underappreciated one, and it's just nice to see a Van Gogh episode that doesn't feel like it's just like, and this is how he painted Starry Night.
The only one that matters.
Exactly.
It was kind of cool that it's just kind of there in the background. It's not like drawn a lot of attention to it until you get to the moment where he's just describing how he sees color.
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool.
That's a really great scene. I love it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, shit. I thought we'd have more to say on this one, but I feel like we're running out of stuff.
I mean, again, it's just a really good episode of Doctor Who. The episodes of Geeky Gentleman are longer than the Doctor Who episodes, so it's really hard to cover it, you know?
We should have just done a commentary, fuck.
Well, and this is where I was hoping more of what we would talk about would be the do's and don'ts of fictionalizing real people's lives.
Oh, sure.
Because this is definitely an episode that's true to what most people's popular understanding of Vincent van Gogh is, but it's also a fake story using Vincent van Gogh, and we do that to varying degrees in a lot of fiction. And I think it's just interesting to see, like, in what cases it works and what cases it doesn't. Like, part of the reason it doesn't work in Blonde is because Blonde is just extremely cruel in how it portrays her life, and at the same time doubles down on a lot of weird choices that it makes you feel like at the end of the day you don't really know what you're taking away from it. Like, she doesn't end up feeling like a person that was wronged in the same way the Elvis movie makes Elvis out to be. It's a movie that just makes you feel like they're beating her down constantly for kind of no point. And that, compared to the real life of her, is a lot less interesting and it's a lot less compelling. Versus this, where it's a pretty accurate portrayal of Vincent van Gogh as far as like the basic stuff's concerned, and he's just off having fun. So it's kind of inoffensive in that way. But then to use that Superman Space Age example again, what about the Lois Lane stuff in that feels kind of wrong or less deserving compared to this? Because it's not all that different. Like, it is just Lois bearing witness to actual history the same way the Doctor does. But one works and one doesn't.
Well, maybe it's just because you hate women.
It's true, I do.
I think it comes down to focus, and competency. The focus being half of it, and I guess competency being the other half of it. Where, what is the aim of the piece? Why are we using this person? What is this about? This Doctor Who episode kind of puts all its cards on the table to plainly be about, hey, we like Vincent van Gogh, and we're going to make you feel sorry for Vincent van Gogh, and this is just a piece about how great Vincent van Gogh is. And unless that person is like Hitler, it's kind of hard to dunk on like a piece that's just about someone who really likes this historical figure. You can do that in very, very awful, horrible ways, but those ones, focus-wise, do tend to be... There's almost more of like an innocence around it, because even if that person was problematic and did have a lot of things, you're effectively having someone, a stan account, basically gush about them for a little bit and trying to explain why they like this period in history or this person. And that at the very least can always be interesting and come from a place of like entertainment. So the focus, whereas like the Lois Lane stuff isn't about, hey, how interesting is Martin Luther King? It's like, wow, let's hype up Lois Lane, the fictional character. You know, like there's a difference in priority there. There's a difference in focus. And then just competence is just a good script. It's just a fun episode to watch. It could literally be anyone, and you could still make this. It could be a made-up character. And really, it works a lot better that it's Vincent van Gogh and his actual person. But like the script on its own is solid, is really good. Superman Space Age sections are kind of just a panel, and they feel throwaway. It's just like, well, what was the point? It just feels kind of disrespectful. And Blondie is the same way. You can make a really fucking good film about Marilyn Monroe, but that script is ass. That is based off a fucking ass book. So I feel like the thing that gets lost in a lot of these conversations, and in our like bat chat DM thing, we kind of got into like a long discussion on this, like on Steve's end with like my wife Erin and our friend Shane. But the thing that wasn't getting brought up that I was thinking of, just like, well, if it's good.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. At the end of the day, is if it's good, I don't know if it totally matters. Like, Elvis is good. Elvis fucking a rule.
That's what I kind of come down to, is like your main priority as a writer. You can give these conversations thought, and you can be very cognizant about what you're stepping on, and a lot of these material, if you're gonna touch it, you need to bring your fucking A game, because I guess it's almost like the barrier to entry gets harder depending on the topic, right? Like the writer who's just writing about their own thing, whatever, go free. There's not really an expectation there. But if you're writing about real historical events, that's another tier. And then if you're writing about real historical events where like the victims are still alive, okay, that's another tier. And then like real tragedies, you got like the Holocaust. So, like, once you start getting higher and higher and higher, I think the level of like you need to meet this challenge as a writer in terms of just making this worthwhile. Otherwise, you're gonna fall flat on your face. Gets higher. Do you guys think that's fair?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense.
I think that's true.
That makes a lot of sense.
I think that's definitely true.
Because if you just, like, what's the fucking name of it? I will not be able to recall the name of this fucking movie. So there's a Holocaust movie. And it's a comedy. It's like a fucking slapstick, wacky situation comedy set with people living in...
Are you talking about Life is Beautiful?
I think that's it. Yeah, I think that sounds about right.
The one where like the dad and the kid are in the concentration camp, and he's trying to make his kid feel like he's not in a camp, so he keeps like making all the Jews in the prisons be like, "Hey, we're not in a camp. This is fine. This is great."
Yeah, that's the one. Is like, oh Jesus fucking Christ, how stupid do you have to be to try to do this? Like, there's that. It's just there's no, like, you step on so many toes right away if you're not going to be respectful to the material and to the struggle. And it's interesting to compare that to something like To Be or Not to Be by Mel Brooks, right? Where it's not like a incredibly similar premise, but it ticks enough of the boxes where you start to see the similarities stick out, where you got Polish people dealing with like being ghettoed and shit in the early days of the war, and you just have this fucking outrageous, uproarious comedy going on throughout all of it, because the focus is very different. There's like moments of legitimate tension and stuff where it's not trying to be like disrespectful, and it's like kind of acknowledging the scariness, but it's also keeping what is a very like recognizable Mel Brooks style humor to the film. So I think you're definitely right, where just what you're doing and like how well you do it, how good the script itself is also important, but just knowing when you're going too far, what the proper choice of emphasis is. I think you're definitely on something there. It's you put it a lot better than I did, Alfie. Good job.
I think also the other half of the equation is, I mean, as a writer, as a creator, you want to tell it as well as possible. Like, you want the script to be good, like this episode is. But I think the other half of it is you want an audience that's willing to meet you halfway over something. And sure, there are certain things that are going to push certain people further away from you to begin with than other things will. But I think people in general have seemed to kind of lost their taste for movies and fiction that's designed to make them uncomfortable, or designed to make them feel sympathy for things that are difficult to have sympathy for. And I think as an audience member, a lot of movies do this. A lot of things touch on difficult topics, and a lot of them make you feel kind of ick about stuff, but they're doing that on purpose. And doing that on purpose has a good, interesting goal in trying to illuminate those feelings. And you can certainly make an uncomfortable, complicated piece about the Holocaust that's exploitative and bad, but you can also make a good uncomfortable piece about the Holocaust that's also really, really good. I mean, there's definitely a difference between like Life is Beautiful versus like Sophie's Choice, where the fact that movie is resting on a titular choice that is just so hard to process in relation to everything else is going on. That's half the point of the movie versus something like Life is Beautiful, where it is in a way kind of trivializing, especially at that point, as something that was barely 50 years old. But I think that's the other thing. I think people sometimes have this weird sort of standoffish persona of like, this person was bad. How dare you use this person in any fiction? And I think that's kind of the wrong way to approach it.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement. There's not much I think we could go over because I think we're all on the same-ish page.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Winston Churchill has always been a weird one for me. Like, he's really fun in the Matt Smith Doctor episodes, but for the life of me, I don't understand why they used Winston Churchill. Like, it's not like they were doing anything specific to that dude historically.
It's just the
like,
fucking.
He's just in
it's
so many episodes.
Well, they got a really good actor for it. I think is the
They
reason
did.
that he keeps coming back. But it is just that fucking mic drop in the episode before. It's like, it's the Prime Minister. Which one? Of Britain. Which one? Winston Churchill. It's that, you know. It's the fact that you get to say it beforehand and stuff. It's a good like mic drop moment. They even got the actor
Also,
back for one of the Eighth Doctor stories too, which is funny.
And the British Prime Minister using dialects to win the war is also just a funny ass plot.
Yeah. Well, I think Winston Churchill is an example of like, you can go too far with this concept of fictionalizing a historical person. Winston Churchill's a good example where, you know, yeah, like, there is some level of admiration for Winston Churchill as kind of being literally a voice that got an entire nation through possibly the worst kind of thing a nation could live through, which is just constant bombardment from the sky and, you know, rationing in wartime, all the awful stuff that you know, Britain legitimately did have to deal with in those dark days in World War II. But then there's also the other side of, yes, we, the British soldiers, have finally and fully beaten back the savages in his soldiering days, and I'm trying to keep India within the hands of the British monarchy where it belongs. And in the Parliament days, like, yeah, that's not the best kind of look for Winston Churchill now, is it? And there's like a legitimate problem of mythologizing and painting too rosy a picture of these historical figures, which are complex figures. Like, there are Soviet propaganda and to this day, like, very rosy portrayals of Joseph Stalin that kind of like pick and choose what they want to show you and how like prosperous a leader he was and the kinds of decisions he made. And while I certainly think that Stalin isn't given enough benefit of the doubt for how like as bad as the situation in Britain was, I think it's fair to say Russia had it about 1 billion times worse. But that doesn't necessarily make up for, you know, the genocides. But for some reason, we are cool with it with some historical figures and not cool with it with others. And it's just, I don't know, it's fundamentally fascinating. Another good example of this is too rosy a picture is like just the way that fucking everybody is portrayed in Hamilton. Like, Hamilton fucking swept the nation and it's such a big deal, but I'm like, yeah, but it's not really. Like, George Washington comes out of that play just as much the fucking shining golden god that he is in everything. You know? I've yet to see the portrayal of Washington that I think the world deserves.
Yeah, I mean, compare something like Hamilton, which is it where the progressiveness of it is all just performative, and it doesn't actually have any of those progressive messages and how it portrays the founding fathers at all, to something like Lincoln. I don't know if you watched Lincoln, but Lincoln's a really good movie that in one step tries to maintain some level of mythology for who he was in a positive way, but then at the same time paints a much more complicated picture of what the Civil War was like and really humanizes that decision making. I think there's definitely a criticism you can lob of certain historical figures have a reputation that's almost entirely created by the mythologies that we pass around for them throughout time. I mean, the Nazis are famous for this, that the image we have in our minds of the Nazis is the image that they fed us through propaganda, and that the actual functionings of day-to-day Nazi Germany...
Oh, we lost him again. Steve, come back. You can blame it all on Alfie.
Don't blame it on Alfie. He's just a man.
Are you sure? Have you checked recently?
No. I'm an idea. As a man, I'm going to be destroyed. But as a symbol, it can be everlasting. Like Steve's Wi-Fi. Oh, dear.
There we go. Okay.
He's back.
Discord decided to update mid-call.
That's good of it.
Which is...
That's nice.
That's ludicrous. Anyway, what I was saying is the image of Nazi Germany that we have on a day-to-day basis comes from Nazi propaganda. But the reality of Nazi Germany is so much different than that, and we have a hard time conceptualizing it. And so there is a legitimate critique to, like, how do we present the Nazis in a way that both does not make light of their crimes, but also doesn't make them seem way more competent than they actually were. And you have that with a lot of American figures in a lot of American movies, too. I mean, I think you can make a very strong argument that the image of the American military that we have in fiction contributes to the kinds of policies that we institute for the American military. And you know the military thinks this because the military spends so much of its time funding or not funding, creating restrictions or not creating restrictions for how they're presented on film. Like, they do legitimately care about that stuff. And so you can definitely lob like a systemic critique of like, okay, do we spend too much time making Winston Churchill look good in fiction? But I think you do still have to take each individual portrayal on a case-by-case basis. Mm-hmm. Sure, maybe in the long run, how we make George Washington show up in fiction is bad, and we should interrogate that. But if there's one really good George Washington movie, that doesn't take away from it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so I think to kind of connect it back to Vincent and the Doctor, it's a pretty, like, good choice of historical figure to focus a whole episode on. Because, like, we bring up the Winston Churchill episode of Doctor Who and the fact that it is a really great actor for the part. He looks amazing and he's actually a good actor. So it just works. But, like, you know, Winston Churchill is in that episode and he's a like prominent character, but he's not anywhere near the you could almost like have him go off and be a Doctor's companion for a season the way that Vincent is here, you know? If this was not based on an actual person, if Vincent Van Gogh was made up by the writer of this episode, you could legitimately see this becoming a companion origin episode. I think it would 100% work that way. Whereas you couldn't see that with the victory of the Daleks and Winston Churchill. It would be kind of weird if Winston Churchill got to come along with the Doctor after that episode. If, you know, again, ignoring the actual historical implications stuff, just as an episode, he's not featured as heavily as a companion. Whereas this makes a smart choice to focus on someone who is not like a controversial figure. Like the ins and outs of Vincent Van Gogh's life, and I'm no fucking expert on it, but what does the public know about Vincent Van Gogh? He was an artist. He was apparently a really good artist. He was sad, kind of crazy, cut off his ear, and he killed himself. Those aren't like none of those details are something that gets him a lot of like ire or like this would make me uncomfortable. There might be more stuff in his life that if you went further into, it would become more uncomfortable, but like just as far as what the general public knows about him, yeah, it's a much safer choice to do an episode about someone like that. you know, the historical figure who is not, I guess, importance probably the wrong word, who is not of consequence to the lives of people in his time, is, I think, very particular, and a particular strength of the choice here.
And I think Doctor Who does a really good job of dancing around different complicated historical figures. Because I mean, we got Winston Churchill, and we got Vincent Van Gogh here, but next season we get fucking Hitler. Like they really don't. It's not like they're trying to be methodical in terms of, okay, we have a time travel show, but we're not allowed to time travel to these specific eras. They do kind of just go balls to the wall. We'll do everything, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. Although Let's Kill Hitler is a really fun episode.
Yeah, get in the closet, Hitler.
It's so funny as shit.
You just saved my life. I promise it wasn't on purpose. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting decisions and smart choices made here. I'm trying to think of, like, is there someone who you just, like, this just wouldn't work for? You just couldn't do this? Like, no, don't have the Doctor meet that person. That's not gonna go well.
Beethoven.
Okay. Why?
Because he's deaf.
Oh, okay.
No, because Peter Capaldi is Beethoven.
That's also fair.
You had a whole scene about this, Steve.
That's a good point. I forgot about that.
I think legitimately though, like any post 1900s or like post World War One. I'll go World War Two. I'll be generous. Post World War II serial killers, I don't think the Doctor should meet. I think that's just gonna be kind of gross and kind of weird. And I don't know if that's gonna get, like, in 100 years from now. It will be so distant. It will be okay.
You don't want the Doctor to fight Charlie Manson?
Right? Yeah. Like, it's just there's just a different, like, Hitler is a global figure, right?
Uh-huh.
Someone like Stalin as well, I think you could get away with it. These are mass murderers on a gigantic scale, but, like, there's a lot more to that, and it becomes kind of cartoonized and politicized by that. But, like, you don't want to have the Doctor meet Jeffrey Dahmer or, like, any stuff like that. You got the Doctor meet Jack the Ripper, no problem, it's fine. But it's like, I think any recent-ish in the last, like, 100 years serial killer, I think is kind of off the table. I don't know you could do that in a way that wouldn't, even if it was like a really good script, if it wouldn't have, like, the script itself would have benefited by not doing that. I don't know how that would ever improve a script.
You know what's funny though is I feel like the current cultural obsession with serial killers would probably make that easier to do. Whether or not it's worth doing or whether or not it'd be good is a different story. But
Right.
The funny thing is, Jack the Ripper, who's historically like the first Western serial killer that's gained prominence and gained mythology in the way a lot of these true crime serial killers have now, he was going around in 1888, and we were putting Jack the Ripper in early film and early literature as early as like 1920 something.
Yeah.
So barely like 40 years down the line, he's already a fictional character. So, like, there's historical precedent for this kind of stuff. And we've done this a little bit where we'll have fictional characters in certain contexts be like, oh, that famous serial killer from the 70s, that was actually me. So I don't feel like that is off the table realistically. Whether or not it's in good taste is a different question. But I could totally see an episode of Doctor Who within the next 5 years that's just like the Doctor versus Ted Bundy. I could totally see it happen.
I think you'd have to pick someone, like, I think the strength of Jack the Ripper, right, is, like, that he was never found out who, right? So you need, like, like the Doctor versus the Zodiac Killer or something. I feel like you may just be able to get away with. Because there's that aura of mystery around it that, like, Charlie Manson doesn't have, right? Because it'd be weird, like, oh yeah, Charles Manson fought the Doctor and then just never talked about it in those decades he spent in prison. I don't know. It's a like, oh man, there's the fucking thing. Just the whole episode is the Doctor meeting a bunch of fucking hippies on this compound, and they all help him save the world or whatever. And just the whole time he doesn't realize it's Charlie Manson in this cult. It's just the most fucked up premise for an episode I could think of.
I think the other thing too is that Jack the Ripper as a serial killer, because he was never found and because he was so mythologized in the press, he doesn't feel like particularly violent, as opposed to the modern obsession with true crime and serial killers is all about the gory details of how they kill their victims. So I think that might make a little bit of a difference of like, I don't know if you could get away with the BBC or Disney at this point letting Davies write an episode about like, okay, here's the Dexter style shrink wrap murder scene from this famous serial killer from 20 years ago. Like, even if they wanted to do that, that might be the thing that makes them stop before any sort of like moral questions. I'm sorry, we can't get away with having a nipple belt. It just doesn't happen on Doctor Who.
Oh my. Oh me. Yeah.
It's not that we wouldn't do it, it's that you won't let us.
Yep, bastards. Cowards. I say let them have 2 nipple belts. Nipple suspenders.
How many people do you have to kill to make a nipple belt?
I guess it depends on your belt size.
That's true.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe you can find people with more than 2 nipples, and that'll cut down on your resources.
Now you're thinking with fucking efficiency.
Yeah. Listen, hey, kind of a weird question. How many nipples do you have? Just the one. Ah, fuck, you're not even worth it. What? Nothing.
I'll spare you for now. What? Never mind. Cool, because I would kind of prefer you to kill me because I don't like the weird sex thing I thought this was going to be. This is actually a relief.
I have a question, and I promise it's not some kind of weird sex thing. Feels like it's a weird sex thing. It's not. I just want to know how many nipples you have. Okay, now it better be a weird sex thing. Otherwise, I think you're going to turn my nipples into like some kind of belt or other clothing accessory. You also got to think about like size of nipples. Are we including like the whole areola and stuff? Because then, I mean, almost immediately you have to go to like women, right? Like you got to like completely cut men out of it.
Anyway, this has been the Vincent Van Gogh history of Doctor Who. I don't know how we got here, but I'm glad we did.
Me too. Yeah, no, I'm pretty happy with this one. I feel absolutely no regrets about this episode. So, what do we want to rate the Vincent and the Doctor episode?
I will go ahead and give it 5 out of 5. 5 out of 5 tearjerker museum visits.
I'll give this one 5 out of 5. Rubber chicken monsters that are metaphors for mental illness. The ultimate Doctor Who in a nutshell monster. We'll take your real life trauma and make it into a silly monster.
The invisible chicken isn't real, it can't hurt you.
And you know what? I kind of love Doctor Who. Mental illness is a lot less scary when you make it into a kind of shitty looking effect.
It's true. Smallville tier.
Yeah. Which is funny because, like, Doctor Who, not even just of this era, of this season, has better CGI than that. And yet.
Yeah.
Anyway.
This whole era has got a much better budget.
Yeah, no, for sure. Alright, anyway. For me, I'll give this 5 out of 5 paintings of churches with that apparently no one noticed the fucking monster in, even though it had been scrutinized for like decades. Yeah, it's a good one. Okay, Alfie, we need a topic for next week. It can be a discussion topic, it can be a review topic, whatever you want, as long as it's got historical basis.
Could you give me like a day or two to think of one? Because I want to make sure it's not just one I pull out my ass, but I don't have one on me at the moment.
Okay, mystery topic next week.
Well, yeah, we'll get to it. Again, if I was coming up with one on the spot, it probably wouldn't last the full episode, so I actually want to put some forward to this.
Okay. Sorry, I could have given you some warning. I just figured you hadn't been on in a couple weeks, so.
Yeah, you're all good. You're all good.
All right. Okay, everyone. Well, until next time, I'm the philosopher.
I am the champion of the oppressed.
And I am not Vincent Van Gogh.
And we are your geeky gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.